Once upon a time, there was a princess named Malcorka. She lived in Ireland in the time after St. Patrick had driven away all the snakes, but before the English came to conquer. She lived with her father, the King Malcorka, in a fort by the coast. And one day Malcorka was walking in the village when she saw in the distance a number of ships run aground on the beach and their crews spill out onto the sand. When Malcorka saw that the men were carrying axes, she felt a terrible dread. The men descended upon the village, killing any who stood against them and catching the women and children who tried to flee. Malcorka and other girls she knew were dragged down to the beach, had their wrists tied with rope, were lifted into the ships, and were carried away on the waves. Countless women like Malcorka were enslaved in early medieval Europe between about the 6th and the 12th centuries. My research explores the emotional experience of enslavement during this period, once known as the Dark Ages. Historians don't call it that anymore, and neither should any of you, but there is one aspect of this period that still lies largely in shadow, and that is the lives and feelings of the women who were captured, transported, and sold as slaves across the European continent and beyond. When historians in the past have studied medieval slavery, they're usually studying an economic institution populated by male agricultural laborers and determining whether these men should be called slaves or serfs. Yet increasingly, scholars acknowledge that the vast majority of people enslaved in the medieval world were women. And when scholars study medieval emotion, they're usually studying a vocabulary used by kings and bishops in their books and letters. Rather than studying the writings of elite men or examining the intricacies of debts and revenues, my work illuminates the emotional histories of the women who labored in domestic and sexual slavery in elite households across medieval Europe. I push the boundaries of our approach to medieval emotion by finding feeling in a sparse array of scattered textual and material fragments that offer glimpses into these women's inner lives. Medieval historians are pretty good at doing a lot with a little, but when it comes to the study of slavery, we have even less than a little. We have next to none of the usual sources of emotional language, like diaries or correspondences or poems or prayers. What we have are brief mentions in estate surveys, legal texts, and some prose narratives. So, for example, Malcorka, the Irish princess, is a character in a saga from 13th century Iceland, one of the only medieval European sources in which an enslaved woman is depicted narrating her own history of capture and sale. Yet, what Malcorka actually says in the saga is incredibly short. The saga reads, "I am called Malcorka. My father is called Malcorka. He was a king in Ireland, and I was taken from there when I was 15 years old." Because enslaved people were forcibly displaced from their homelands, they had few possessions and left only very rare material traces that defy easy interpretation. So, for example, on the Danish island of Bornholm, archaeologists studying fragments of pottery from the 11th century have identified a shift in technique from a Scandinavian to a Slavic manufacture style, suggesting the sudden arrival of a new labor force around the same time that slave-taking was increasing in the Slavic lands. Similarly, cloth can tell us a tale of demographic change in Iceland. So decaying bits of textiles studied by researchers at Brown's Hafenreffer Museum suggest a shift in spinning style from a Scandinavian to an Irish style around the same time that Malcorka may have been captured and brought to Iceland. These tiny fragments of evidence lead me to wonder what was life like for the women who entered these Danish or Icelandic workshops and who brought with them their own habits and their own histories. The question that my research seeks to answer is, how do we use these sparse sources, these brief lines of text or pieces of cloth or pottery, to build an emotional history of an almost invisible demographic? And for me, the answer lies partly in imagining. What might have happened? How may it have felt to arrive in an unknown land among a strange people, to work as a nurse or a maid or a weaver or a potter under the wandering eye of an entitled master or the vicious hand of a jealous mistress? I push the boundaries of what we can know about the feelings of marginalized peoples long past. By reimagining stories like Malcorka's, I hope to show that enslaved women in early medieval Europe survived and subverted their circumstances and altered their newfound worlds. Thank you.